Well, a week ago tonight, we were here as news was first breaking, really, about the fight between the Prime Minister and the Chief Justice. Unprecedented, we called it then, and unprecedented it still is tonight. It sits as our topic one. Chantal and Andrew are here in studio. Bruce joins us from Ottawa tonight. Chantal, why is this happening still?
That would be the million-dollar question, because there is no real strategy that accounts for it. There is no payoff. And no real principle, frankly, involved in the Prime Minister's aspersions about what happened in the Supreme Court. The case that is at the center of this is, frankly, of little relevance to the daily life of most Canadians and those that it matters the most to, Quebecers, because it's about the selection of Quebec judges, liked the Supreme Court ruling. It is also a very, very dangerous game, if you can call it that, in the sense that I think if you're the Prime Minister of Canada, rightly or wrongly, there are a few things that you have to be really careful about handling. Medicare, the Charter of Rights. I think the Supreme Court ranks right up there. And I am meeting people who are saying, conservative voters who are saying, I'm a Harper man. And this morning I was a Harper man, and I've always voted for him because of the economy. But this, the Supreme Court, it's not something that a Prime Minister can be playing and throwing stones at.
You know, all week people have been trying to come to grips with, was this just a blunder? Was it a mistake, Bruce? Or was it a piece of brilliant strategic maneuvering on the part of the Prime Minister to put himself in this position? Where are we on trying to determine the answer to that?
Well, I don't think there's any good reason for it having been done. I think there's probably an element of strategy, but I don't think it's good strategy. I think that there's certainly plenty of blunder amidst whatever strategy there is. Look, Peter, I think if we're looking for reasons why it occurred, there's a couple that are reasonably plausible. One is that the Prime Minister decided that it would be better for people to be talking about this than to be talking about the temporary foreign workers program, which is kind of like a Frankenstein policy for them right now, or to be talking about the fact that his plan for changing the Senate is effectively dead based on the Supreme Court ruling. Another plausible factor is that we've seen some evidence that the Conservatives' momentum, at least in fundraising terms, has been dissipating lately. It's possible that they've been losing donors, and they see this issue as a way to kind of rally that sentiment that the institutions are all out to get us Conservatives and maybe raise a little bit more money. But as I said, those are plausible arguments for why it's going on, but they're not good reasons for it to have happened.
On the fundraising front, we should know donors seem to be down, but dollars still up there, still pretty impressive dollars going into the Tory banks. Andrew, where are you on it?
There's a reason why it's unprecedented, because it's really not a good idea. This is the kind of rash, reckless act you might expect from a rookie backbencher to be lashing out at a Chief Justice in personal terms and impugning her integrity. You don't expect it from a Prime Minister of 8 years standing. I don't see the upside for him, even politically, as our panelists have been saying. It's one thing to beat up on Parliament, because Parliament's already been beaten down to such an extent that people have sort of lost track of why it might be important to them. But the Supreme Court still, retains a lot of respect in the public. And when you're messing with that, I don't see how you come out the winner from that. As I say, it's one thing to disagree with judgments the Supreme Court might have ruled on, and they're perfectly within their bounds to say, I disagree with that finding. But to go after in these personal terms in a way that nobody finds credible, nobody of any standing finds credible, I think is a lose-lose-lose strategy.
And what's really striking is that this is a party that had fairly serious positions on abortion and same-sex marriage, and that could legitimately say our positions were defeated by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court changed the regiment, and a lot of Conservative voters would agree with that. And so if you were going after the court on issues that mattered to the base, then you could see some kind of link between one or the other. The judge made law, but this is actually an issue that mostly involves the pride of the Prime Minister. He appointed someone. He knew that he was taking a chance with the rules. And what was he told? He was told that he could appoint people like that if he could get the government of Quebec to agree that the rules for the judges that hail from the civil law side of the equation should be changed. And it looks like spite, like my guy was thrown out, and so I'm angry and I'm having a fit.
And as others have said, if he had a legitimate concern about a allegedly inappropriate communication from the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, Why did he not do anything about it at the time? Why did he not talk to anybody about it? Why did he not initiate some sort of proceedings or ask her to recuse herself from the hearing? He waits 9 months to the aftermath of another losing fight at the Supreme Court, and suddenly these private communications are being released out into the press, or talked about in the press. So if you're a Supreme Court judge or Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of some future point, are you going to have any kind of necessary and appropriate communications with the government if you can't be sure that's going to be kept private at all?
I want to move on, but one last quick point on this, and Bruce, you deal with it. Not surprisingly, the main focus has been on two people, the Chief Justice, Beverley McLachlin, and the Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, but there actually is a third person in this, and that's Peter MacKay, the Minister of Justice. Does he wear some of this as well?
Well, it's a terrible episode for him, Peter, in the sense that it should have been on his watch and on his to-do list to avoid a situation like this from developing. It's impossible, though, to believe that he's writing the speaking notes for the Prime Minister on this. It's much more likely that this is a Langevin block strategy, and that whatever he thinks about it, even if he doesn't like the strategy, that Peter MacKay has been either powerless or unwilling to push back and offer a counter proposition. But I also think, apropos what Andrew and Chantal were saying, is that it's absolutely evident to me that there would have been lawyers within the Department of Justice offering advice to the minister and through the minister to the Privy Council office or the Prime Minister's office well in advance of the effort by the Chief Justice to contact the Prime Minister, to the effect that there was a challenge likely to happen with this nomination. So if that pattern, if that paper was developed, that advice was provided, and still we have the Justice Minister attacking the Chief Justice over basically raising the same kind of concern that they obviously had themselves already, that says something about the quality of this attack.
All right. Let's switch to topic two, which is once again the sort of kind of open nomination process that had been heralded by the Liberals, which has come under question again now as a result of Justin Trudeau's policy that anyone who runs for the party, any candidate, new candidate, the former candidates get kind of grandfathered in on this, but any new candidate has to agree to a pro-choice position. This made yesterday, the day before. There are thousands of people on Parliament Hill today arguing the opposite side. Clearly, they're never going to be Liberal candidates as long as Justin Trudeau's the leader. But what about the issue of open nominations? We've discussed this before. Does this once again kind of fly in the face of this, or is this really different? It's a fundamental principle.
Well, it's different in one way, that it's a policy rather than in other cases where they just wanted to protect a favored candidate and told somebody else to don't bother running because the fix is in, basically. On this one, you can say, well, it's a party policy, you just have to live with it. But there was a time when these kinds of deeply felt personal moral issues were subject to free votes, abortion, the death penalty, these kinds of issues. It's not a given that there has to be a party line on it. There are people on both sides of this issue, certainly within both the Liberals and the Conservatives, and I dare say even within the NDP, who have different feelings about this issue. I'm not sure why this had to be decreed to be a party line. He's within his rights to do so, but when you look now that you've got, beyond just the Liberal Party, you've got the Liberal leader saying nobody who's pro-choice of any, pro-life of any kind can run for me. Nobody can for the NDP. You can for the Conservatives, but you can't actually do anything about it. You're leaving out a large section of the population that has misgivings about the status quo, would like to see it debated, and are simply being told, don't bother, there's no party that represents you.
Chantal?
I don't think that the Liberal Party would have accepted ever a candidate that is against the Official Languages Act, because in this area there aren't very many francophones and they need money for social services. And I don't think that the Liberal Party would want to have candidates who are against the Clarity Act in Quebec, and as far as I know, they are quizzing their candidates on that issue. It is party policy that charter rights and charter rulings that are associated with charter rights are issues on which the Liberal Party has a stance. It's not just a pro-choice position. It's the notion that if you wanted to go pro-life, you would have to use the notwithstanding clause and suspend the civil rights of women. And I have to say, for having watched open nominations within the Liberal Party in the Turner era, when the pro-life movement decided that they were going to focus on those meetings and have candidates of their own, that was not an open process. It was being taken over by a lobby. And I have also watched Paul Martin at the tail end of his last election campaign, standing on a stage next to Toronto, saying that Stephen Harper would undo the charter rights of women, the charter rights of gay people. And behind him were lots of these MPs who were selected at the time when pro-life was making a pitch to be in the Liberal Party, who had voted systematically against gay rights, against abortion rights. At some point, a leader that stands for something has to say that this team has signed on to what the party stands for.
We should be clear, though, that it does not actually implicate using the notwithstanding clause. There's no court ruling that says any abortion law of any kind would violate the Charter.
No, but the pro-life position is not an abortion law. A pro-life position is no abortion. Those people on Parliament Hill are not looking for a 21-week
but lots of other people might be. So in other words, it's not a given that if you differ in any way from the status quo, which is no abortion law of any kind, it's not a given that you are automatically in the slot of saying no abortions ever of any on any description. There's a huge range of opinion in between.
All right. I want to move on, but you get 30 seconds on this one, Bruce.
Well, I don't
move on to the last topic.
Peter, I don't think that parties are required in terms of their participation in democracy to be able to have candidates that will stand for any position on any issue. I think it's entirely legitimate for a party leader to say this is an issue that we will campaign on, or at least will be part of our platform. And so I don't think there's an issue here. I think, frankly, it would have been news if Mr. Trudeau had said we would welcome candidates, whatever their position on the issue of abortion.
All right. Let me move it to this last topic for tonight. It's the Premier of Ontario, the Liberal leader in Ontario, Kathleen Wynne, trying to seek election in the middle of a campaign. And who's her target? Her target, Stephen Harper, again today. Watch this.
When there is a situation where there is an injustice, it's important that the Premier of Ontario stand up to the federal government, stand up, in this case, to Stephen Harper and say, this isn't right.
All right, so the last time I remember such targeting like this by name of another leader was the way that the Reform Party used Mulroney's name leading up to that '93 election, where everything was Mulroney this, Mulroney that. You don't see Kathleen Wynne talking very much about Tim Hudak. You see her talking a lot about Stephen Harper. Why is this happening, Bruce? You're the backroom strategist. Why?
Well, Mr. Harper's negatives in Ontario are north of 50%, so he is among the politicians that you could name and arouse some anger. He's probably at the top of the list these days. I think this is a little bit of a preview of what we might see in the next federal election campaign, where the Liberal Party is saying, well, we've got two things that we want to do. We want to kind of depress or soften or weaken the enthusiasm of Conservatives to turn out, and we want to coalesce voters on the left side of the spectrum. And so that's what she's doing. She's trying to remind New Democrat soft Horwath voters that if they want if they vote NDP, they might end up with a Conservative government and more power for the Harper style of conservatism that they don't like. And she wants to weaken, as I say, the enthusiasm of Conservative voters by reminding the Hudak soft supporters that they are also associated with the federal Conservatives.
Smart strategy, Andrew?
I think for the reasons Bruce says, it has something to recommend it. I mean, it's interesting that before this election, leading into it, the conventional wisdom was that Tim Hudak, the Progressive Conservative leader in Ontario, was a big liability for his party. Lately, he's been actually polling slightly ahead of them. So I guess Mr. Harper makes a more convenient target. He and his ministers kind of opened that a little bit by weighing in early in the election campaign against Premier Wynne's pension plan, and so that kind of gave her opening.
You got the last word.
And what's interesting about the strategy is that federal ministers and Stephen Harper can't help but respond, because they are going to be campaigning on their economic record to the same voters that they really need to win over a year from now. So they can't really let someone make the case against them all around Ontario for a month and sit back. It's not like Quebec, where you have 5 seats and your chances of helping in any way, shape, or form yourself or others are nil if you're the Conservatives.
All right, we'll keep our eye on the Ontario election. We may well be talking about it again. So thank you to all, Andrew and Chantal here in Toronto, and Bill, or as he's affectionately known, but Bruce in Ottawa tonight. Thanks, Bruce.